Chris gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. The road stretched before him, a black ribbon in the night. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Fear, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He was running from something he couldn't outrun, something that haunted the shadows of his mind. The old oak tree at the bend flashed by. Its branches, gnarled and twisted, looked like skeletal fingers reaching for him. He shivered, pushing down the rising panic. He had to keep driving. He had to get home. The engine sputtered. Chris swore under his breath. The car coughed and lurched, then died completely. He slammed his fist against the dashboard. He was stranded, alone, with the shadows closing in. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Only the distant chirping of crickets broke the stillness. Chris fumbled for his phone, the cold metal slick in his sweaty hand. No signal. Of course not. He was practically in the middle of nowhere. Then he heard it, a voice, soft and familiar, whispering his name. Chris! It seemed to come from the back seat. He whipped around, heart hammering against his ribs. The back seat was empty. Lisa? He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. It couldn't be. Lisa was gone. He had said goodbye to her months ago. Chris! The voice came again, closer this time, filled with a desperate urgency. You need to come back! You need to help me! Chris's head spun. He wasn't imagining things. He could hear Lisa's voice as clear as day. But how was it possible? She was gone. He had seen her grave, felt the weight of the earth on his hand as it covered her coffin. He remembered the last words she had spoken to him. Her voice weak, her hand clutching his. Don't let me go, Chris. Promise me you won't let me go. He had promised. He had sworn he would never forget her. And now she was calling to him from beyond the grave, asking for his help. He couldn't ignore her plea. He wouldn't. Taking a deep breath, Chris steeled his nerves. He had to get back to town, find a phone, call for help. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't rest until he found a way to help Lisa. The old Victorian house loomed before him, a silhouette against the moonless sky. It was eerily silent, the windows dark and lifeless. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, a mournful sound that sent shivers down Chris's spine. This was Lisa's house, the place where they had shared so many memories. He fumbled with the keys, his hand shaking. The metal was cold against his palm. With a deep breath, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay. It was as if time had stood still within these walls. The floorboards creaked under his weight as he walked through the darkened hallway. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering light of the street lamp outside. He felt a presence here, something unseen watching him, its breath cold on the back of his neck. The house was filled with whispers, soft murmurs that seemed to slither just beyond the edge of his hearing. He could almost make out Lisa's voice calling his name, but the words were always snatched away by the wind. He moved through the house like a man in a dream, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder as he climbed the stairs. He could feel his own heart pounding in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. He reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He stumbled, his hand brushing against something cold and smooth. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was a candle, its white wax unmelted, sitting on a small table. Next to it lay a red ribbon, its satin surface gleaming faintly in the darkness. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew and earth. Chris shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. He held the candle high, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Cobwebs brushed against his face, and he swatted them away, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always hated the basement. It was dark and cluttered, filled with the discarded memories of lives lived and gone. But Lisa had loved it down here. She said it was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the world and lose herself in her art. He found her easel in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. A half-finished painting rested on it, a splash of vibrant color in the otherwise drab surroundings. He ran his fingers over the canvas, feeling the rough texture of the paint beneath his fingertips. It was Lisa's touch, he felt, her energy, her passion. The box was tucked away in the back of the shelf, hidden behind a stack of old books. It was made of cedar wood, its surface polished to a high sheen. Chris lifted it carefully, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its lid. He knew what was inside. Lisa's belongings, things she had cherished, things that held her memories. He opened the box slowly, as if afraid of what he might find inside. The scent of lavender wafted up to him, bringing with it a rush of memories. He saw Lisa's smiling face, heard her laughter echoing in his ears. He closed his eyes, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He picked up a photograph, his fingers trembling slightly. It was a picture of him and Lisa taken on the day they met. They were both so young, their faces full of hope and dreams for the future. A future that was cruelly snatched away from them. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Chris sat on the floor, the cedarwood box open before him. He had arranged Lisa's belongings. Around the candle, the photograph. The red ribbon, a dried rose pressed between the pages of her favorite book. He could feel her presence in the room, stronger than ever before. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He had to help Lisa find peace. She was trapped, her spirit tethered to the world by unfinished business. He had to help her let go. He began to speak, his voice low and steady. He told Lisa how much he loved her, how much he missed her. He spoke of their shared dreams, their hopes, their fears. He told her about the life he was building, the life they were supposed to build together. And he told her that it was okay to let go. The air grew heavy, the candle flame sputtering as if caught in a sudden wind. Chris opened his eyes, his gaze drawn to the center of the room. A soft light began to glow, growing brighter with each passing second. It pulsed with an energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The light coalesced, taking on a familiar shape. Lisa stood before him, her form shimmering and translucent. She wore a white dress, her hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Her eyes, wide and luminous, met his, and a smile touched her lips. "Chris," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. "You came back." He reached out to her, his fingers passing through the ethereal substance of her form. "I promised," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised I wouldn't let you go." Lisa's eyes shone with a light that seemed to emanate from deep within her soul. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his. He felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace he hadn't realized he'd been missing. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude for everything. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the objects he had arranged. "You remembered," she said softly. "You never forgot." "Never," he echoed, his voice choked with emotion. He wanted to reach out to hold her close, but he knew he couldn't. She was gone, her spirit finally free. All that remained were memories and the echo of her love. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and orange as Chris drove down the highway. He rolled down the windows, letting the cool morning air wash over him. The world seemed different now, sharper, more vibrant. The oppressive weight that had been crushing him for months was gone, replaced by a bittersweet ache. He glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see Lisa sitting there, her head resting against the window. But the seat was empty, just like it had been for months. He smiled sadly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. His phone buzzed, startling him. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it, his breath catching in his throat. "Thank you for setting me free. I love you, always and forever. Lisa." He stared at the message, tears streaming down his face. He knew with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason that she was finally at peace, and so